Kalispell, Montana. Morning of May 11th, 2025. A 911 call pierced the calm of the Silverbrook Estates neighborhood. A man's voice came through the line. Calm, almost chillingly so. No sobbing. No panic. Just a few words. Enough for the dispatcher to sense something was terribly wrong. Before the line went silent. When officers arrived, the house looked ordinary. The doors were locked, the interior quiet. But the moment they forced their way in, they were confronted with a nightmare. In the living room, Nicholas Olson-Hartley, 33, and his wife, Katie, 27, lay dead from fatal gunshot wounds. In the next room, their two young children, a toddler and an infant, were also found lifeless, as if no cries for help had ever escaped those walls. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen. The only gun was inside the home. And soon the truth surfaced. The father, the very man who had called 911 hours earlier, was the killer, taking the lives of his family before turning the weapon on himself. But the haunting question remains: what could turn a devoted husband, a loving father, into the executioner of his own family? From the outside, the Olson-Hartleys looked like any young family, building a quiet life in Montana. Yet behind closed doors, an invisible darkness was closing in, and no one would ever understand what drove Nicholas to pull the trigger, destroying the very people he once cherished most.
First tonight, leading our broadcast at 5 o'clock, new developments in a tragic case in Kalispell, where police are investigating the deaths of 4 family members. Officials are calling it a murder-suicide. On Sunday morning, officers responded to a mental health call in the Silverbrook Estates neighborhood. When they arrived, they found 4 people in the home shot dead, including 33-year-old Nicholas Olson-Hartley, his wife Katie, a 6-year-old child, and a 7-month-old baby.
Katie was remembered as a devoted wife and a gentle, nurturing mother, the very heart of her family. Her sister-in-law, Kayla, recalled through tears, "Katie was the best mom we've ever known. Everything she did, every choice she made, every breath she took was for her children. For Katie, her 2 kids were her universe. Heidi, 6 years old, bright, curious, always bursting with energy. Her laughter filled the house, a sound so contagious it made everyone smile. Silly, passionate, full of life. Heidi wanted to see everything, try everything, be everything. And then there was Stellan, just 7 months old. A sweet, gentle baby boy, always smiling. Kayla remembered, her voice breaking. He loved to bounce. He got so excited whenever it was time to eat, and he was always happy just being with us. Stellan was named after a late family member, yet he himself was taken before he ever had the chance to take his first steps. The tragedy unfolded in Kalispell, Montana, a small town nestled in the Flathead Valley, surrounded by mountains, forests, and lakes. With a population of fewer than 30,000, it had long been the picture of peace, a place people came to feel safe. Just miles from Glacier National Park, Kalispell is a community built on family values, trust, and neighborly bonds. It was here that the Olson-Hartleys chose to build their lives. They blended in easily, smiling at neighbors in the grocery store, playing in the yard, living the portrait of a young family. Katie, like so many proud mothers, often shared photos of her children with radiant joy. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual about the Olson-Hartleys. And that is what makes this tragedy even more haunting. Because behind those quiet walls, a storm was silently gathering. The case shook the entire town, leaving behind a hollow grief and a question that may never be answered. What can turn light into darkness? In the hours after the killings, investigators began piecing together the scene. They confirmed that the 911 call had come from Nicholas Olson-Hartley himself. The exact words have not been released, but the tone was disturbing enough to send police racing to the home. When they arrived, there were no sounds of struggle, no shouting, no resistance, only a suffocating silence inside. Officers were forced to break down the door, and in room after room, the same grim tableau repeated. A wife and 2 young children, each shot dead, none showing signs of a fight. According to the investigation, Nicholas shot his wife and children before calling 911. And when there was no one left but himself, he ended it all with a final gunshot. Forensic psychologists reviewing the case agree on one thing. While this was a singular act, the pattern is frighteningly familiar. A man in crisis, a family on the brink of collapse, and a system that failed to recognize the warning signs until it was far too late. Mental health experts believe Nicholas was showing signs of severe breakdown. His unnerving calm during the 911 call was not peace. It was the voice of despair, panic, and a man slipping away from reality. Police believe Nicholas may have suffered a mental health emergency in the moments before the massacre. But the question that still haunts Kalispell has no answer. Why didn't anyone see it coming?
From a law enforcement perspective, we'll move forward and make sure that the family has the answers that they do need, anything that we can help them with as they move forward. And we also are putting things in place for our first responders and help them process this and work through the difficulties that come when we handle a crime scene of this nature.
What happened in Kalispell was not just an isolated tragedy. It was part of a chilling pattern. Before the small town could even begin to process its grief, another family annihilation unfolded in Nebraska, just one day earlier. On the morning of May 10th, Dawson County deputies entered a rural home and found 4 bodies. The victims were identified as Bailey Coe, 41, and her 2 sons, Hudson, 18, and Asher, 16. The killer was none other than her husband, Jeremy Coe, 42, who murdered his wife and children before taking his own life. Jeremy was not a man silently concealing his pain. His decline was well documented, and most tragically, Bailey herself had sounded the alarm. Just days before the murders, she launched a GoFundMe page, openly admitting that her husband was in the midst of a severe mental health crisis. Jeremy had battled depression since 2009, surviving at least 4 previous suicide attempts. In the weeks leading up to the killings, his physical and mental state collapsed rapidly. In March, Bailey awoke to find him standing at her bedside, holding a knife, whispering, "Something's wrong." By then, Jeremy was malnourished, severely dehydrated, and incapable of caring for himself. Medical experts later confirmed these were unmistakable signs of a full-blown mental health emergency, but intervention never came in time. Bailey did everything she could, from electroconvulsive therapy to inpatient care, desperate to bring her husband back. Yet after years of fighting, she admitted in a heartbreaking post, "Mental illness is stealing my husband from me." On May 8th, Jeremy was discharged from the hospital after yet another round of treatment. 2 days later, on May 10th, Bailey, Hudson, and Asher were gone forever. The one who discovered their bodies, devastatingly, was Bailey's own father. In an open letter, he wrote that the memory would haunt him for life, and he condemned a system that had abandoned his daughter's family. 2 tragedies, one in Nebraska, one in Montana, just 24 hours apart. And in both cases, the perpetrators were not hardened criminals or cold-blooded killers, but fathers consumed by mental illness. Men who were under treatment. Men with families who fought desperately to save them, and still, it wasn't enough. These were not isolated tragedies. They were the consequence of a mental health care system that always seems to stop just short of real intervention. A system where patients may wait weeks for treatment, fight endless battles with insurance, or be discharged the moment they're no longer seen as a direct threat. In both cases, the warning signs were painfully clear, but the safety net was too weak. Experts insist this wasn't random violence. These were systemic failures. A society unable to address mental health crises until it's far too late. And in Kalispell, the cost of that failure was 4 lives, and a community forever scarred. On the night of May 11th, after hours of processing the scene, interviewing neighbors, and combing through every forensic detail, the Kalispell Police Department finally issued its official statement. What they confirmed was exactly what the town had feared. Nicholas Olson-Hartley had dialed 911, then took his own life, along with his family's. Those stark words were enough to suffocate the air across the entire community. Police didn't stop at announcing the truth. They acknowledged the devastating emotional toll, not only on the victims' loved ones, but on the first responders, medics, and investigators who walked into that home and witnessed a scene no one should ever have to see.
The Kalispell Police Department reports there's no risk to the public at this time. An investigation is currently underway and a police presence has been in the area all day.
The report ended with a reassurance. There is no danger to the public at this time. A simple statement, but one that could never erase the collective scar now etched into Kalispell. The investigation is still ongoing. All day, police swarmed the neighborhood, combing through every last detail. In their official statement, the Kalispell Police Department emphasized, this tragedy didn't stay contained within one house. It wasn't just a horrific scene. It was a crushing psychological burden for every officer who stepped through that doorway. Inside the department, support programs were immediately put in place to help their own officers cope with the trauma. Because even the most seasoned among them will never easily forget what they saw that day. City officials also expressed their deep sympathy for the surviving relatives of the family, those now forced to move forward in a hollow reality, facing an unimaginable loss. For Kalispell, this was not just a senseless act. It became a collective scar that will haunt the community for years to come. In the days following the tragedy, the Flathead Valley sank into a grief that rippled outward like shock waves. A small town, where everyone knows each other's face, is now tied to a memory no one ever expected. To support the survivors, friends and loved ones of Katie Olson-Hartley created a GoFundMe fund. The message posted there was chilling in its bluntness. Katie, Heidi, and Stellan were stolen from us in the most horrific way imaginable. The donations weren't just for funeral expenses. They were meant to ease the burden for Katie's parents, Dave and Denise, as well as her sister Kayla and her fiancé Joshua, all of whom had just lost an entire family. From warm family dinners and familiar laughter, they were thrust into a cruel new reality. Cold coffins and lifeless legal paperwork. I know this valley has a big heart, and it will act. That message rang out, and it proved to be true. Donations poured in. Each message carried love, anger, and shock. Complete strangers sent words like whispered prayers, because when nothing else made sense, it was all they could offer. People held each other tighter, even across hundreds of miles. But for the family of Katie Olson-Hartley, no amount of support could ever fill the void she left behind. Not in her children's rooms, not at the dinner table, not in the quiet spaces where her laughter once lived. Amid the unspeakable grief, Katie's family chose to speak. Her sister Kayla shared a message on behalf of their shattered family. Her voice was steady, but every word carried a weight that left readers breathless. On behalf of our family, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to our friends, loved ones, and this community. We feel your love and support, and we could not get through this without each and every one of you. It wasn't just gratitude, it was survival, a lifeline in the dark. Because while the headlines slowly fade, the Olson-Hartley family remains trapped in a reality they cannot escape. Their lives are now divided into two parts, before and after that fateful call. As investigators carefully piece together the truth of that Sunday morning, the survivors are simply trying to breathe. Each moment cuts like shards of glass, and within that pain, they must make room for 2 children and a young mother who are still here. What drove Nicholas to act remains a void. No record of domestic violence, no restraining orders, no criminal history. Not a single document foreshadowed the tragedy. And yet, that very absence leaves agonizing questions, not just for police, but for the entire community and for mental health professionals across the state. To many, Nicholas Olson-Hartley was just a husband, a father, an ordinary man living quietly in a small town. But to mental health experts, his final act revealed something far deeper, far more dangerous. It points to a silent crisis spreading among men across America. Men who are struggling, and struggling in silence. And sometimes, that silence ends with a gunshot. Now, the town of Kalispell carries a scar that will never heal. A family erased, a community shattered, and the haunting question that lingers. How do we recognize the warning signs before it's too late? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more haunting cases, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next.